Here we go. Right, good morning, everybody. Once again, another Wednesday, another Mesh Energy kind of Wednesday webinar. Really great to have everybody on this morning. No doubt a number will join after the event. This week around, we are doing the second in our kind of guest architect series that we've started. And I'm delighted to have Darren Bray from Studio B.A.D. On with us. Darren and I personally have been working together for a number of years, and Darren will explain a bit more about what he does and what he's about and what he's talking to you in detail about his projects. But in essence, Darren's particular area of expertise, and this is why we've asked him to come on here, is about using existing buildings. There's a lot of work being done on beautiful new buildings or raising old buildings to the ground and starting from scratch, and they're the ones that win a lot of awards. But Darren today is going to talk to you about, I guess, the beauty in the existing buildings and repurposing those in a number of kind of areas. So just by way of a bit of admin, if you guys can keep your mics on mute, that would be greatly appreciated. By all means, turn your videos on, but if you can keep your mics on mute, that would be fantastic. And I'm going to hand over to Darren to explain a bit more about himself and also explain what he's going to be talking about today specifically.
Thanks, Doug. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, it's all good.
Excellent. As Doug explained, Doug and I have been working together for a number of years now, probably about 6 or 7 years. So I've been in private practice in Hampshire for the last 22, 23 years. And almost 2 years ago, I decided to leap in and set up my own practice, foolishly in the year of Brexit. And then in the second year, we're now into a pandemic. So my guess is that if I can survive in these 2 years, then there's a good chance we might be able to survive going forward. And so, you know, I worked in private practice for other local practices in the New Forest and in Hampshire over the last 20 odd years, working for some great people, working on some great projects. But I got to the point where I thought it would be quite interesting to have a go at setting up my own practice. Now, those of you that don't know me, I spend 25% of my week teaching at the new Reading School of Architecture, which is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. I spend 2 days teaching in first year studio and running the industry and practice unit for first years. The practice was set up in January 2019, and effectively,
there we go.
Hello, somebody's jumped in on the call, it sounds like. So our practice ethos is to reveal the narrative of each project through a process of thoughtful collaboration between clients and members of the design team. We're transparent and democratic in all that we do, guided by a strong ethical compass. And central to this process is our ability to problem solve. And we are very much into turning challenges into opportunities, which is very much about this presentation this morning, and difficulties become potential. So I think, you know, going back to what Doug said in the introduction, it's very exciting to design a new building on a greenfield site, but it can be quite intimidating. I think we are quite interested in working on projects where we've got interesting existing conditions, and you know, that can be quite helpful in some respects. So as I said, you know, we set up the practice last year, and this was a short article the Architects Journal ran about us, where we were kind of talking fundamentally about trying to change the perception of architects in the industry. And I'll talk a little bit about that a bit later on. This time last year, Doug invited us to write the intro to his new book, Right First Time. We were very flattered at the time. And I guess we've been working with Mesh on 2 or 3 projects since we set up the practice 2 years ago. But we were quite keen to kind of get involved in the book. And I think you know, it's a really fantastic opportunity to kind of put this book in front of architects, but also with clients. So as we know, this young lady, Greta Thunberg, activist, kind of started the conversation about, you know, where we should be moving in terms of climate change. And then I guess that moved on to Extinction Rebellion. So, you know, fundamentally, you know, these are conversations that are happening in wider society. So therefore, why as an industry are we not taking that head on? And I must admit that my latest crop of first years at Reading are bringing this to the table day one. They want to talk about it. So, you know, as some of us that have been in the industry for a while, you know, why shouldn't we be tackling this absolutely head on? This is an interesting slide that I borrowed from Duncan Breaker-Brown recently, who gave a presentation. But I think, you know, when you look at this slide, you know, this kind of looks towards the 2100 and looks at, you know, where the temperature difference is going to be on the planet, and kind of looking at, you know, where we need to be in terms of the work that we're going to be doing globally and the challenges that we're going to face. So, you know, we're quite interested in, you know, what the circular economy is. So what is a circular economy? It's an alternative, a traditional linear economy. You know, something that looks at keeping resource in and use for as long as possible and extracting the maximum value from them whilst in use. Then recover and regenerate products and materials at the end of each service life. Recently, we came across this really fantastic practice based in Holland called Rota, and they are interested in kind of reuse and deconstruction. So effectively, they've set up a business to come along at the end of a building's life and effectively take that building apart and kind of sell it on, move it on. So why aren't we doing more of that? Not just in terms of, you know, if we are going to take buildings apart, let's look at kind of reusing and repurposing. And if you're working on an existing building and you're kind of removing elements, why can you not kind of set these things aside, reuse them, sell them? So we deal quite a lot with conservation and historic England. And I think, you know, I've spent a little bit of time over the last week just kind of going back to historic England and looking at, you know, where they kind of position themselves and what their kind of advice is. And I think it's really interesting when you kind of, you know, look at their core kind of recommendations. And I think, you know, as architects, we probably don't spend as much time as we should kind of reviewing and kind of looking at, you know, the kind of key pieces of recommendations from people like Historic England. And I think, you know, when you read this small piece from their website, it says, compared to refurbishing a traditional Victorian terrace, a new building of the same size produces up to 13 times more embodied carbon. This equates to around 16.4 tons of CO2, which is the equivalent of the emissions released by driving 60,000 kilometers or 300 times around the M25 in a large petrol car. Demolishing buildings also not only produces millions of tons of waste, 1/3 of all the waste produced in the UK every year comes from the construction and demolition, but building new has a high energy cost, guzzles resource and accounts for 26% of the world's plastic consumption. So I guess as a practice, we see ourselves as kind of social architects. So what does that mean? So my colleague Flora Samuel, who heads up research at the New School of Architecture in Reading, recently produced a book, Why Architects Matter. Some of you may well have read this book. I think it's incredibly powerful, particularly for our students, but it talks about architects and the type of architects, you know, so not just the typologies of the work that you're working on. And I think, you know, I kind of was reading the book again last night, you know, Why Architects Matter examines the key role of research-led ethical architects in promoting well-being, sustainability and innovation. So therefore, social architects as an ideal work for the good of people and the planet. That requires a degree of humility and self-enhancement that is not generally associated with architects, but I think that's changing. So, you know, some of the projects and the things that we're currently dealing with, you know, we're working in high streets at the moment. Suddenly we seem to be appointed to look at the future of high street, and one of the first projects I'm going to talk about actually touches on that. We're working with a client here in Southampton that's a homeless charity, a project that also Doug was involved, and we're now moving forward with other projects with this homeless charity here in Southampton. So it's interesting when you start to dip your toe into this world, because actually when you look at what's happening in the UK, it kind of shows you that there are some really interesting areas of work within reusing and repurposing. Just the idea that, you know, there are something like 11,000 UK homes empty for over 10 years. There are banks empty, that, you know, there are all sorts of typologies that are empty in the UK. Our first project, the bookshop in the High Street in Portswood in Southampton, which we completed about a year and a half ago. And this is an old NatWest bank in the High Street in Portswood, a very tired old building, you know, not quite past its sell-by date, but you know, very close to. So it sits here in the High Street in Portswood. And our client, October Books, who've been featured in The Guardian by Owen Hathley, who happened to have worked at October Books, has a sort of 40-year-long tradition of being in Southampton. They were paying a huge rent to their landlord, and it was basically crippling them. So Claire here on the left decided that she would hatch a plan to go and buy an old bank. I was invited to attend a meeting in a coffee shop with Claire, and she brought on a venture partner, the Society St James. This is Trevor, the chief exec. At the time, I sat in the coffee shop and I thought the project was completely bonkers, that a bookshop were going to crowdfund and sell loan stock to effectively put together a project whereby the bookshop would buy the bank, they would take the ground floor, and the Society St James would work with us, and we would deliver housing on the first and second floor for some of their clients. So we started on a journey, which was an incredible journey. I've learned an awful lot working with Claire and October Books, and that journey started in a lot of community engagement. And I think, again, you know, as a practice, we've learned an awful lot about, you know, deep listening. You know, really listening quite carefully to clients. What do they want? What are their needs out of an existing building? And for us, community is really, really important. You know, what is community? It's a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common. It's a group of people living together and practicing common ownership. It's a particular area or place considered together with its inhabitants. It's a place, a district, a country considered collectively, especially in the context of social values and responsibilities. And I think this last point, this is kind of weaving its way through all of our projects now. So we proposed to look at what was the bookshop of the future in an existing building. And I don't know if any of you know Shakespeare & Co., which is based in Paris. It was in the news last week, actually, because they're trying to raise funds to survive. But the bookshop has existed for a number of years in Paris. And it's a place where people come and kind of sleep and kind of dwell within the books. So we had this idea that, you know, that might be something that we bring into this existing building to bring the community in. Well, we went to London. We did a trip with the client to look at great examples of bookshops. And this is the bookshop that was delivered by Second Home, which is just opposite their co-working space. So this was the interior of the existing bank. I mean, NatWest literally kind of walked out, left it, and the bookshop, along with our help, put together a proposal and put in a bid. Their bid was accepted, and then it was a case of what we were going to do with this building and how we were going to make it more inviting to the community. So we did a feasibility study, and we kind of looked at all sorts of different options, whereby we were kind of keen to keep, you know, the kind of front of house where the bookshop was, but have a community space at the back. But we had this idea of kind of weaving a street through the centre of this building, so that there would be a sort of community engagement through the kind of physical properties of the building. And then key to that was, you know, this is our little party diagram, the idea of the street kind of weaving its way through. Then in the centre of the building was this huge, great cast in situ concrete vault, which we had to retain because I think we'd have used the whole budget just removing it. And then our key idea was to create this kind of book of a kind of wall of books that kind of children and people could kind of inhabit. So that, you know, we had to be really careful with the budget that we had and carefully place that in the right parts of the space. So we worked up a proposal whereby the bookshop was at the centre of the space, opening up the front elevation, keeping the cast in situ concrete vault, which would become effectively the store where all the books would be, and then having a community space at the back. And in terms of touching this building lightly, you know, the front elevation, it was just literally a case of removing some of the stonework and adding in a glazing to get light deep into the plan, and then just kind of rebranding more than anything else, but effectively kind of retaining the sort of neoclassical stone facade that had existed on the previous NatWest Bank. So I'm sure as many of you know that once you start working with an existing building, that's where it starts to get really interesting and you start to unpick, and there are many surprises. This is Rob, our site agent, and this was the kind of vault from the old cash machine, which we extracted and decided that we would kind of reuse, and that would be a little sort of moment, a sort of moment to the past. But once we started stripping out this building, that's when we found this cast in situ concrete floor, which nobody knew about, that had actually been installed to add a layer of security so that people couldn't get into the bank and effectively steal anything. So that gave us a major problem, because this cast in situ floor that had been cast was effectively pushing the building backwards because of the weight. It enabled us to do an acoustic test, which we managed to kind of then reduce all the acoustic separation between the ground floor and the first floor. And then we started the process of beginning to bring this building back into life. So this is the kind of huge wall of books, which is all made out of birch ply, and you know, we had to work quite hard to kind of design something that, you know, would be reasonably affordable, but convince the client that this would be our kind of major interior intervention. And then you can see we've kind of removed some of the stonework from the windows, putting in new double glazed windows. Doug and Mesh helped us to upgrade and to increase the kind of thermal performance of this building. And then the Society St James, who then took the first floor and the second floor, the housing elements for their clients, they then invested in PV panels, which then fed back into the whole scheme. And then we upgraded insulation, we upgraded windows, and put in a completely new heating system. This is my daughter kind of sitting in the bookshelves. Probably this was probably a couple of weeks before we opened the bookshop. One of the interesting things was that the client had to move all the books from the old bookshop to the new bookshop on the same high street. And Claire had this wonderful idea that on a Sunday morning we would all congregate on the high street, we'd form a human chain, and the books as a community would be moved. So we had 200 people that turned up. Somebody took a little photograph and a little video, posted it online, and within 3 days we went from being in the Daily Echo to the New York Times and on the BBC website. But it just showed the power of community and the interest in community, and all of these people in this sort of these 200 people along the high street had all invested in the project either through crowdfunding or loan stock. So the bookshop was launched. This is the amazing team and the amazing committee that we were working with all along. And I think without Claire, this is Claire at the back, who's the kind of mainstay of the client. Without Claire's vision, I don't think this project would have ever flown. And I've learned a great deal from Claire in terms of not being afraid to have a vision and then basically put together the process to make sure that kind of vision is going to work, and the ambition. So a couple of weeks after the bookshop opened, they were featured in The Guardian, they were featured on Radio 4. So again, you know, this project just had immense power in terms of the kind of community aspect. And then a couple of weeks after it opened, the Rebel gardeners arrived in the middle of the night. They're the kind of Banksy equivalent of the gardening world, planting their wonderful planters in front of the bookshop. So you can see we've actually done very little to the existing facade. It's a case of, you know, kind of cleaning down the stonework, adding in new windows and a lick of paint, really. So this is the vault that we kind of retained with its huge great steel door, and then all the books are stored in that vault. We then designed a very simple desk, and then we've got the old kind of ATM that was at the front of the shop, which was where all the kind of cash was stored. So again, we had to kind of literally dig this out of the floor and then design that into the desk as part of the whole interior. And then this was, as I say, this was our major interior piece, which was the wall of books. And then you'll see in the background here, this is the cast in situ floor that we retained, and that became our acoustic separation between ground floor and first floor. So in a way, it was kind of, it was a sort of a very simple stripping back of this building. But I think, you know, I'm very drawn to people that are involved in community, and Ai Weiwei, the artist, is somebody who I come back to all the time, and I really love his quotes, which it's something that we use all the time in our work with clients. And I love this quote: you begin to understand that we all have the same basic needs, that our sense of humanity and integrity, our desire for warmth and safety, to be well treated and respected, are the same. So moving on from October Books, we were invited to go and meet St Margaret's Church down in Southsea in Portsmouth about 18 months ago, through a contact of mine, a chap called Andrew Melbourne, who I've taught before with Portsmouth. And Andrew happens to head up Portsmouth City Architects. This is Andrew's church, and we were invited to go and meet the church. We, again, are always quite keen to kind of understand the community, and those of you that know this project by Le Corbusier, Ronchamp, that formed part of our kind of thinking, just purely on the basis of light, and you know, we had no preconceptions of what we were going to do with this building, but we were really interested in that idea of light and how that might interface with our work on this existing building. And I guess, you know, for us, we were interested in the St Margaret's community as a vessel of light, and our design intention was to encourage that light to emerge into the community it serves. So this is St Margaret's Church, which faces, any of you that know Southsea, this is Highland Road that wraps around, and then you've got the rather large cemetery in front of it. This is the existing building. So this element here, this is a sort of 1950s extension, and then in the back you've got the Victorian church. So again, we entered into a lot of community engagement. We didn't want to walk into this project and begin to impart what we thought we needed to do with this building. It was quite interesting because here, this is the church hall, and this was the building that the church were using. They weren't actually using the main space, and we said, before we do anything, we want you to engage with the existing building. We want to stand back and observe and see how you might use this building. This is Stephen Morgan, the local Labour MP, who came along to our community event. We did this a couple of hours before one of their Sunday services. And we just kind of, we talked, we set them various tasks, and we had this kind of wonderful response reflecting back to us, you know, what people thought the church of the future should be. So again, you know, lots of community engagement, you know, and it's really interesting, you know, what was really important, and you, as you see from these diagrams, it's community and family. And Fran, who's the minister at the church, for him, his faith is incredibly important, but what's more important to him is how he serves his local community. So we produced with a client a draft brief. I love this quote, "Come as you are, no perfect people allowed in this church." This kind of reflects the client, and it kind of reflects everything about this project. So again, we went through a process of trying to understand, you know, what the future of this building might be. And for them, fundamentally, what was really important was to kind of upgrade the thermal performance of this building and put in heating. It has no current operating heating system. So again, we've worked with Mesh on this project to understand how we can put in a new heating system. We've been through a process of trying to understand the fabric of this building. And for us, what was really important was the kind of permeability of this building. It was how were the community going to be welcomed back into this building? Because actually, you know, the front elevation of this building doesn't necessarily lend itself to opening its arms up to the community and kind of showing this kind of permeability deep into the plan. So we were quite keen to look at the threshold as well. The client wanted to kind of look at, you know, how could we have a new threshold, a new welcoming threshold into this building, as well as retaining the existing fabric. So we began to think about how we could make the new entrance and the threshold of this building incredibly transparent, how you kind of have this deep permeability into the plan of the building. So we began to look in section and in elevation as to what we might do in terms of this new threshold, some ideas about a new entrance box. And I guess we began to settle on an idea that the new entrance threshold would be a very lightweight box, would be a completely different element in terms of the kind of historic heavy thermal mass building. And the idea was that this entrance kind of welcomed you deep into the plan. So our initial thoughts at the end of feasibility study was to propose this sort of copper box that had this rather lovely north light. But before we did that, there were some sort of more important issues that we had to deal with in terms of the existing fabric of the building. And we kind of started to talk about meanwhile solutions as to small incremental pieces within this building that would enable us to begin to just kind of look at the interior and use the interior as our kind of way to, you know, looking at what the future of the building might be. So our first challenge was the client was developing this little space at the back of the church, which was a little children's space. And this was a sort of mini project to design a door within this space so that it could be separate from the rest of the church. So we went through lots of different iterations. Again, we're slightly obsessive about testing ideas, and the idea was to kind of design and develop this sort of mini screen and door so that the room at the back could be used for Sunday school. And so, although this was a very small, tiny piece, this kind of screen and door that was designed out of birch ply, this effectively has kind of driven the rest of the project in a way. It's a kind of incremental process, and it enables us to test ideas at kind of one-to-one scale. Once we kind of installed this, it almost gave us an opportunity to be slightly more bold with the project, because everybody kind of fell in love with this door and screen, which is quite interesting that, you know, a client and the congregation would get so excited about something as simple as a door and a screen. But I think it kind of showed people how sympathetic and careful we were going to be moving forward. So the next challenge was to look at putting a new heating system in this building, and Doug and his team have worked very closely with us trying to understand how we might do that. It's not easy in a building such as a church, where, you know, you don't have the funds to completely and utterly firmly upgrade this building. So the idea was to look at putting in a new floor. So this is the existing parquet floor, which was taken up, bagged up, and then we sold the parquet floor for quite a lot of money. It went back into the budget. The new heating system looked at a bivalent system whereby we could use mains gas, but we could also use air source heat pumps. And in fact, last night we actually finally got our planning permission for the air source heat pumps. It's only taken us 7 months between submitting that and finally get it. So we're really excited that the heating system is going in, and hopefully by March the 31st, with Doug's help, we'll be tapping into the renewable tariff. So we proposed to the client to put new underfloor heating in and trench heaters, and to put in a polished concrete floor for the kind of thermal mass. And I've never seen any client get so excited about polished concrete and just the stainless steel grates that go on top of the trench heaters. For a minister to stand in front of his church and describe his church as sexy is just quite phenomenal. And for me, it says, well, actually, dealing with existing buildings can be just as exciting as designing a new building from scratch. The team from Lazenby's who laid this floor, here's Fran, here he is kind of just musing about his new floor. And the first bit was kind of laid and we were able to go in and see it. And I was completely taken aback how this floor has totally transformed this space. We've designed a new cafe that on wheels that will go in here, and one of the local street artists is kind of painting this wall. So it's a kind of meanwhile solution. This is phase one: heating, concrete floor, cafe, and then we'll move on to the next phase later on. So the phase three is the extension, and effectively we've just finished the planning drawings for this project, which has just been submitted to planning. I suspect it's probably going to take another 7 or 8 months before we get any kind of resolution on the planning application. These are some of the visuals that we've had produced, which it hasn't changed a great deal from the feasibility study, but this is the kind of north light deep in, and we've got our new cafe in here, and then there's a connection back to the existing church hall. So as I say, this has just been submitted for planning. I suspect it's probably going to take quite a long process. We've had a very positive pre-app to this, which we did at the start of the year. So hopefully, once we get planning on this and we can get some fundraising, it might be a case that this might happen in the next couple of years. So again, this quote for me sums up St. Margaret's: if you help one person, you help humanity. And that's very much Fran's philosophy, who's the minister at the church. So coming back to something that's slightly smaller, a listed house in the South Downs, which we were appointed on about a year ago. This beautiful, beautiful listed cottage that has the most amazing brick facade. Quite a challenging project in that it's got this incredibly long garden that's wrapped with the most incredible flint wall. A growing family, just had their second child. Really interesting client. The wife is a round the world yachtswoman, and the husband works quite high up in BAE Systems, refurbing old ships. So they're very much rooted in the world of the marine industries. But this project, as I say, has been quite challenging because there's huge different level changes on this project. So it sits in the main high street in Meonstoke. They have a shared driveway and a garage, so we've had to look at a new garage. But you can see here with the landscaping, really quite challenging as to how you might weave in a new addition to this building. So again, we've been through lots of different iterations. The brief from the client was a new granny annex, a new dining space, a new lobby and back door. Fundamentals to a family, but how do you do that on a listed building? So again, we've been through many different iterations, looking at how we might kind of work that through. And kind of once we, kind of looked at, the possibilities of kind of solar gain and the opportunities within the landscaping, this was then presented to the South Downs National Park. What was really interesting was one of the options that we presented at pre-app stage. We had proposed this tiny little new entrance, which the conservation officer was horrified that we'd even begun to think about proposing something on the back of the listed dwelling, and effectively said, I don't really care what you do in the garden, it can be as contemporary as possible, but please don't attach anything to the rear wall. So we took that as an opportunity to kind of really explore where we might go with this as a project. And so we kind of removed the kind of sort of glass extension that we proposed at pre-app stage. And effectively, we just carefully began to look at stitching in the kind of existing, you've got the existing listed cottage here, and then here's our new dining space, new rear entrance, and then we've got the granny annex, and then we've rotated the garage into the landscaping. So quite tricky in a way, and we were quite nervous that we were kind of pushing into this kind of historic landscape, but that didn't seem to kind of really phase the conservation officer. I think just doing the pre-app and kind of removing this element here has kind of proved to be really quite interesting. So effectively, what we've done is been kind of trying to create the kind of glass stitch with a new dining space with a little zinc roof over the top. And then just kind of the idea is that we kind of use really well handmade bricks on this extension that kind of flows deep into the landscape, so that we're kind of removing ourselves from the kind of listed cottage. So again, these are some images that we've just used to put the planning application into the South Downs National Park. And I think what's interesting, it's taken us 12 months to kind of work with the planners and work with the client to kind of move forward on this. We've been through probably about a dozen different iterations of this project. But I think what's key to any existing building is just being very careful and sympathetic and quite forensic in a way, because I think had we leapt in and gone with the first option, I don't think it would have been as successful. We've got huge support from the neighbours on this and from the parish council. So again, we've learned a great deal about the process is kind of more important than where you get to in terms of the final outcome. So again, we've had a model made of this scheme just to kind of show the kind of context and to kind of show the landscaping. As I mentioned, the client's property is really quite interesting because they've got this amazing long garden with this kind of flint wall that wraps in, and our proposal is something quite modest, really. I mean, actually, the floor area of this building is really quite modest, and the idea is that the flat sort of roof becomes quite a hairy green roof, so that it kind of begins to blend in to the garden. And then we've got our kind of brickwork pillars, and then I guess our major kind of contemporary element is the dining room space and this kind of zinc pop-up roof over the top. So again, coming back to reflecting on the process. Again, I'm hugely passionate about reflecting on projects, and this quote for me kind of sums up that process with this family. And the final project I'm going to talk about is something that we've just kind of started on site. It's a redundant farm, which is in Bergfield, which is kind of just to the north of Reading. In fact, when you stand on the site, you can see the Medeski Stadium in the distance. We were appointed on this earlier this year. So this is the existing farmhouse that has been developed by the farmer over the last 100 years. That we've just kind of opened up the roof, and you can see that it's basically been added on over 100 years, which is really quite interesting. So this is the farm that our client has purchased, and this is the existing farmhouse. And so for us, the first task here is to refurbish, upgrade the existing building. And so we are stripping literally everything out. So we're putting in new triple glazed internal windows. We're thermally upgrading the inside of the building in terms of walls, roof, and floors. And so that's kind of phase one. This is the farmhouse as you approach it, and the clients effectively have.
Oh, sorry, folks, we just lost Darren there for a second. Just whilst we try and get him back, do remember, if you've got any comments, folks, to get that, get any comments on the kind of the chat, the chat bit, the chat window. So if you've got any questions about the comments or questions for Darren.
Hi, Doug, can you hear me?
Yeah, that's fine. I was just whilst you were frozen there, I was explaining people could put questions in the little chat box.
Oh, right.
Go for it. Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Okay. Back in the room.
Back in the room.
So this is the existing farmhouse. We've just been looking at exploring how we might do a little contemporary intervention, which might be a living dining kitchen and some bedroom spaces. So again, we've been looking at sort of analysing that site and how we might maximise sun path and the long views across this wonderful farm. So what we've essentially done is we've kind of created three options. So here we are at the moment, we're refurbing the existing farmhouse, and then we've just submitted these three options to the planners as a pre-application. to kind of explore how we might do this kind of new contemporary box. And we're working with the Society of St James at the moment on a new project looking at some modern methods of construction. So we're talking to a really interesting company called Agile Homes, who some of you might know, up in Bristol. So we're quite keen to kind of possibly work with them on this project, where we might kind of create this new element, which might be off-site construction. And the client's quite keen to explore that. So the option one is the kind of living, dining, kitchen space, and then master bedrooms with en suites, flat roof element. So again, we've kind of modelled that so that we can show the planners how it relates to the existing building. Second option we've come up with is a slightly more agricultural building, pitched roof with agricultural cladding on it. And this option kind of only shows one large master bedroom, but it's quite interesting. The client's really up for doing something quite contemporary against the existing farmhouse. So again, we've kind of modelled that to kind of prove to the planners how that sits within the local context. And then our last and third option is a monopitch, so facing north, getting north light deep into the plan. And again, it's a kind of living, dining, kitchen scenario with a master bedroom, slightly more agricultural than the first option with the flat roof. And then again, we've sort of modelled that to show the planners. It's quite interesting because we've literally just had the pre-app response from the planners, and it's quite surprising because they've actually gone for this one. In fact, they pretty much told us if we submit this, they'll give us planning for it, which is really quite interesting. And so we're just waiting for the client to kind of push the button now on this for us to get on with the planning application to see whether the contractor can catch up with us, because the contractor's got sort of 6 or 7 months to refurbish the existing house. Our challenge is to try and get planning and start construction drawings so that the contractor can carry on the farm. And so that's a kind of a very quick rattle through 4 of our projects. I know that Doug said we've got 45 minutes. I think we're almost there. But again, you know, coming back to Mr. Ai Weiwei, who I hold in incredible high regard, I think for this quote kind of sums up where we are in the world at the moment, and it kind of sums up us as a practice in this time of uncertainty. We need more tolerance, compassion, and trust for each other, since we are all one. Otherwise, humanity will face an even bigger crisis. And I think it's really important. You know, lots of the clients that we're working with at the moment, we're now working on a couple of high streets here in Southampton, and you know, we're learning a great deal working with stakeholders, and it's really interesting kind of working collectively rather than turning up on a greenfield site delivering you know, a huge great house, which, you know, I've done in the past, and those are great, but I think, you know, we're feeling like we're learning more in kind of what we're doing now. So thanks, Doug. I've kind of rattled through that quite quickly.
Right, I'm back. I'm unmuted. I was trying to find my unmute button. Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously, we, as Darren said, you know, we've been involved in a couple of those projects. I think, you know, although we've been involved, I haven't seen some of those recent photos, Darren. So it's great to see. I mean, particularly the bookshop. That looks such a. I mean, I would happily walk into that shop and spend a lot of time there. It looks such a fantastic environment, and from the state that it was in when they took it over, you know. I forget the name of the lady who you said kind of pioneered it, but for the team to have achieved that is incredible. And I guess it's a bit bittersweet in as much as there will be more opportunities like that on the high street to convert empty buildings pretty soon, if not already. And again, the church, a massive project, that the church, and that's only part of the way through. And one of the things that Darren didn't mention there was, one of the other advantages of underfloor heating in the church was, you know, Darren and the team were going for flexibility of how the church was going to be used. And we talked about radiators and various things. So as well as the thermal mass, and it was great that they got the opportunity to pull the parquet floor up to do that heating. There's awesome opportunity there for flexible use of that building. And with underfloor heating, You know, you're getting heat. You're not having to keep things to the side of the church or around the pillars to keep warm. And having radiative heat in that space is really going to make that a fantastic place to be. And great, you know, Fran, the client there, as Darren would probably agree, is a fantastic chap, and you know, great to have some good clients on board. But what I was going to say, Darren, was, I mean, I think what I got from that was this, and this is something I feel very strongly about, is all about communication. If you don't follow kind of due diligence and have the right conversations and approach the process in the right way, what is already very tricky dealing with an existing building, although there might be lots of opportunity there, if you can't communicate and talk properly through the options with the client and other people it affects, as you said, neighbours and other stakeholders, wider stakeholders, you know, it can be a real problem. So, I mean, would you say that communication was the key to really success for existing buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I mentioned this idea of deep listening, and you know, as I say, some of the projects we're involved in the high street here in Southampton at the moment, those kind of conversations are proving really quite challenging, because you've got deep-rooted traditional thinking, and we're not talking architecture here. We're talking kind of animation and dressing a high street, whereby the road's been closed and everybody's horrified that the road's been closed, therefore that closes down their business. So you know, we're having to work really hard between daytime and nighttime economies, and listen really carefully to what people are saying. And in those communities, you have to listen to everybody's voice, because if you don't, it doesn't give you the opportunity to then unlock possibilities, because there will be, you know, those voices, and these projects we're working at the moment are political, you know, where stakeholders can run off and go and talk to MPs and councillors. So, you know, we're having to be really careful about how we listen, how we respond. You know, the bookshop and the church, you know, it becomes a collective design team. You know, it's not the architect turning up and saying, this is the proposal. And it was really interesting when we started the church. They were kind of horrified when they appointed us to do the feasibility study, and we said, we're not doing anything until you get into the existing building and start using it, and we will come and sit in the Sunday services and observe how you use the building. They thought we were just going to rock up and say, here it is, here's the master plan. And suddenly they got it, that, you know, we were there to listen, and they were there to kind of reflect, you know, everything about them. And I think, you know, the more you do that, the more successful the project is.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I mean, you know, it's, you know, when you actually take the time to listen, and you see more success having listened, you do it far more intently the next time round. And that's foreign to a lot of people in their design processes. I guess it's easy to go in because you've got lots of experience, try and force a particular solution on, you know, on the project that you've been signed up for. But as you say, you know, that can cause a hell of a lot of issues, and not necessarily the right solution. You know,
no. And in some ways,
you've got an idea. It doesn't mean that it's the right one.
In some ways, it gives you more permission to do kind of more radical things. I mean, when we started the feasibility study on the church, one of the first things we did, we just presented some precedent images, and everybody said, "Oh, these are quite radical," but actually, we want to go more radical. And it's that permission thing that I see. You know, it's interesting. You know, we were laughing and joking about the RIBA stages at the start of this conversation, but there's these layers of permission with clients. I think that you know, whether you relate it to the RIBA work stages or not, but you know, you get to a point and you say, right, I'm going to try and test this little idea, and then you see how it goes. And in some ways, it's about clients telling you, you know, what they don't like.
Okay, great. We just got a few questions which we'll try and cover off, Darren. So Helen's asking about the project with the listed house extension you were talking about. I think that was the third project there.
Yeah.
She's asked that, assuming no upgrade was allowed to the existing fabric, I'm guessing of the listed building, how did you compensate for this with your construction details and choice of heating system in the new extension?
So in a way, we're not quite there because we're in planning at the moment, but at the pre-app stage, the client asked me to do a couple of sketches on the interior of the listed building, and we got massive knockback from the conservation officer, even suggesting a sketch that we might physically do something in the existing house. Yeah. So that question is really relevant, that we are going to have to do something with the new element. But it is frustrating in that, you know, you're kind of been, you know, on one hand you want to do the most efficient thermal upgrade as possible with these buildings, but there's a level of conservation here, and in some ways we faced it with the church, because with the church we have to put a proposal into the diocese, we have to present to the diocese, and then they will come back and tell us whether what we're doing is okay in terms of the fabric of the building, and then we have to deal with planning, and I guess that is one of the challenges with existing buildings. I mean, the church is not listed. The church is in a conservation area, but it's locally listed within Portsmouth. So it is quite challenging in those situations. So at some point we are going to have to do this whole assessment with the client. On that project, the client wants to have a completely separate kind of heating system for that building on the listed. You know, so we will get into a conversation about, you know, renewables and how we're going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it is, you know, just talking kind of technically, I mean, we've been involved in a number of listed projects, and you get some officers, you know, one I can think of that we're working on at the moment, you know, there's an officer who is very, very open to thermally upgrading a listed building. There is a tiny medieval part of the listed, the original building that they definitely don't really want touching, but it's a quarter of the volume of the actual listed house. So they've got kind of scales of grey. So as you move away from that very, very original, very oldest part of the building, they're happy for more and more insulation to be done. But like you said, you know, you've got officers that because it's got this status, just won't allow anything to be done. And, you know, that invariably, technically, it does compromise the overall solution, because you're losing valuable energy. You've got this lovely new bit, that's not so much of a concern, but certainly the older bit, you know, it'd be nice to have something. And again, it all comes down to discussion, because that may be the opening statement. If you actually sat down and talked through options and found out where their real pain point was, or something they were very precious about, invariably there's a workaround for all of this, isn't there? Yeah,
I mean, it's just, in a way, it's just frustrating, because on the farm, I'm really excited that on the farm building, that's a Victorian building, you know, we're doing quite a lot to that building. You know, triple glazed windows, you know, we're thermally upgrading everything, you know, so it, you know, in a way, it's not going to be a million miles away from, you know, a new build in some respects. It's just, if we were able to do that to every building that we were working on, and we were able, as you say, to work with conservation, you know, we'd be able to make, you know, bigger upgrades and more influence.
One other question from Jeremy. He's asked about the church. The underfloor heating is in zones, Jeremy. I can't exactly remember how those zones are laid out, but I think from memory, and you might be able to correct us, Darren, given that you've seen actually installed, but where you've got pillars down the church, you've got this kind of central corridor of the church, which is a primary zone. The new extension has zones for the toilets and for the entrance hall and stuff. And in the main church, where you have pillars, and I can't remember the formal name for the wings of the church, but those are separate zones in their own right. So yeah, the church, that massive church area, is split up into subdivided zones. Is that, am I?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, Doug's completely correct in that it's really important to get those zones within that space, because the cafe is going to sit in one space, and they might not want the heating on there all the time. In one of the arched wings, the client wants to build a children's play centre. So we're going to have to, you know, that's been zoned, so when we build that, that'll have to be turned off. We can't have sort of heating blasting through this kind of children's play centre. So it's been really critical that the heating is as flexible as the design, as the kind of meanwhile solutions. And I think that's really interesting, that actually as a design team, that everything that you're looking at in a project like this, where everything needs to be flexible and changing, whether you've got a cafe in there or a shop, which we will have in the church, that you've got to allow for that flexibility. And I think you know, the bivalent boiler system is really interesting. You know, that's something that Doug introduced us to be able to kind of work with renewables or not. I mean, even in the last 24 hours, we've had this interesting planning condition given to us by the planners, who said we can't use the air source heat pumps between, you know, 11 o'clock at night and 7 o'clock in the morning. So, but hopefully the system that you've come up with kind of works with that.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Exactly. There's always a workaround, but that, that was something that none of us were aware of, and they've obviously dropped that in, because of potential noise concerns and stuff from the community. We've got a couple more questions popped up. Alex Sims has asked, do you think there needs to be reform to current regulations for renovation projects to encourage more sustainable solutions? Have you got a comment on that?
Absolutely, because if I look at the farm project, building control wouldn't really be asking us to do a major upgrade in terms of that building. It's just that us and the client, that's what we've decided to do. And I think at the moment, building regulations doesn't go far enough. At the end of the day, it comes down to us as designers and to clients. Where it comes down to the will of people wanting to do the right ethical thing. So at the moment, there isn't enough kind of regulation that kind of sort of pushes more of us to be doing that stuff.
Agreed. And David's asked about reclamation. Actually, he's saying is when you're designing buildings, do you consider kind of building reclamation yards and what stuff is available locally for recycling materials?
Yeah, I mean, for example, it's not exactly reclamation, but on the farmhouse, we brought an expert in to try and reuse all the existing timber floorboards. So that they'll all be sanded down and reused, and we'll just put rugs on them, and the client's really up for doing that. I think it's about building up kind of intelligence and having and knowing people. And interestingly, the chap that I'm working with on the farmhouse who's refurbing the floorboards, he was the chap that found somebody to buy the parquet flooring in the church. And it's just, again, I think it's about building up a level of contacts that you can go to and say, right, we've got a material that we're going to take up, but we don't want it, disappearing off into a skip and into landfill. I'm finding in the industry that there's more and more conversations going on now. So, for example, our contractor on the farmhouse has brought this amazing demolition contractor in, whereby we're literally kind of retaining every bit of demolition material apart from the steel rebar and the asbestos. Everything else has been carefully taken down, and the description and the method state from the demolition contractor is incredible. It just kind of blew me away when I saw how they were going to carefully, take these things down. So again, I think it's about finding people that you can work with on projects and just say to them, look, we'd like to reuse this, or can you go and find a parquet flooring? I saw a client at the start of the week who said, actually, I want to do an extension, but I'd like to put an old parquet flooring in it. So are you saying, it would be in the uber technological world that we live in, is there no kind of national, obviously we've got eBay, but is there any kind of websites or anything that people can go to if they've got materials they're trying to get rid of in a particular postcode? Are you aware of any hubs? I'm not aware of a central one, but there are, I'm sure everybody's aware that there are specialists. You've got companies who go and take down all the industrial lights from warehouses and in industrial factories, whether it's here or in Europe. They then charge an astronomical amount for those light fittings. But again, they're not going to landfill, and they're being used in interior projects. So there are lots of examples out there, but it's interesting, your question, Doug, that it'd be quite interesting for somebody to go and collectively locate all of those.
A portal for somebody to say, I've got, 500 square meters of parquet flooring. It's in this condition. I live, or the site is here. And it just becomes a centralized repository for people buying and selling materials, and they can agree prices. And that'd be quite cool. That's only going to grow, isn't it? Only going to be. Yeah.
Sounds like an app.
It does. Well, there you go. There's a go. So it's time we ended this webinar now, and I better go and develop that. Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, look, Darren, that's been a fantastic presentation, and love the little kind of philosophical comments at the ends of, or quotes at the ends of those projects. Hopefully, everybody on the call has benefited from seeing some of Darren's projects there, and of course we're I'm sure, hopefully, Darren, you're happy for us to share details if you guys want to get in touch. But it's Studio B.A.D. He's got a website. What's your website, Darren? Just for everybody's.
It's studiobad.co.uk.
There you go. How difficult does it get? Brilliant. Okay. Thanks, folks. Next Wednesday, just out of interest, David Reed is doing the underfloor heating and radiators masterclass. So based on what you've heard about the church, you might be able to learn some more about underfloor heating and zones, and when it is best to use it or not, and electric and wet systems and all kinds of things. And if you like this architects series, next month is Gary Wilburn from HPW Architects. So that's very much, he's done a lot of commercial sustainability work for many, many years, some very, very big projects. So if you're interested in more kind of the commercial aspects of sustainable architectural design, he's going to be covering off some of those projects. But for now, Darren, a huge thank you once again. And thanks to all who have attended. Make sure you sign up for the next one. Look forward to seeing you there.
Thanks, Doug.
Cheers, guys. Take care. Bye. Bye.